The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome to Plain Talk. We got a busy show for you. We got a lot to talk about because we're not going to have a guest. The election you may have heard, the primary election you may have heard, is on Tuesday next week. So this is our last show before the primary. And we're going to be going through all the races, or a lot of the races, I should say, that are going to appear on your ballot and talk about them and give our predictions, what we think is going to happen. Some of these races are easier to predict than others. as you know, won't surprise any of you listening to this. But this should be a lot of fun. We'll go through a review of all this stuff, and you'll get to hear what Chad and I think.
And then on Wednesday, we'll learn how wrong we were.
Yeah, that's right.
And then people will say, why do we listen to you two knuckleheads?
Yeah.
Because you guys don't know anything more than the rest of us.
Chad and I are smart enough to do a lot of hedging in our predictions. We're going to give ourselves plenty of...
I'm going black and white.
Black and white?
Predictions. Yep.
I'm going to be hedging like a good lawyer, politician.
Rob, my goal is to be a Hall of Fame baseball player. So if I get one of three right, I'm in really, really good shape.
33%.
Yeah.
That'll get you to the Hall of Fame. Maybe. If you hit like 3,000 hits too. All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Let's start with the age limit ballot measure. This is obviously going to sail through. There has been no organized opposition to it whatsoever. And to be clear about what it does, because I think people have just said, well, it's just what it does. It says that if you are a candidate, if you're going to be elected or appointed to serve any term, and by the way, there's no appointments to the U.S. First of all, you can't appoint people to the House of Representatives. That's in the U.S. Constitution. Second of all, in North Dakota law, you can't. We hold special elections for senator. We don't do appointments.
So how about when Quentin Burdick died and Mrs. Burdick?
We changed the law.
Oh, okay. Since then, all right.
Since then, we changed the law. The states are allowed to change that part of the law. The states cannot do appointments for representatives, though. Well, that's in the U.S. Constitution. They always have to be elected of the people. But basically, so if you're going to appear on the ballot, though, you can't be 81. To hold those positions, you can't be 81 years old by December 31st of the year immediately preceding the end of the term. And any such person is prohibited from appearing on the ballot. So basically, if you're of an age where at the end of your term, by the end of your term, you would be 81 years old, you are prohibited from. So in the Senate, I guess, that's weird because given the lengths of terms, House terms are 2 terms. So in the House, I guess you could be as old as like 78, 79. For the Senate, it would be like 75.
Yep. When you start thinking about it, I mean, Doug Burgum's 67.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about that Doug Burgum is in better shape and probably than you and I.
Listen, one person's 81 is not another person's 81. I mean,
amen.
People age differently. But then also the interesting thing too is that the ballot measure says if a superior law requires age limit candidates to appear on the ballot in a primary or general election. So basically they're saying if this ends up getting struck down by the state's U.S. Supreme Court, which there's a good chance it will be, they still have to print the ages of the candidates on the ballots, which I think that might be right for another lawsuit from the perspective of age
right for another lawsuit. I mean, so we're going to have data points for candidates, their political party and their age. Should we put on blood type?
Yeah.
I mean, like their positions on specific things. I mean their gender.
Like if you're hiring somebody, you can't ask how old they are.
No,
but we can do this on the bus. So I don't know. I understand. It's going to sail through because there's a lot of people who are looking at Joe Biden. There's a lot of people who are looking at Donald Trump, and we're a little tired. And also, I mean, we look at what's happened on the Supreme Court. We had Ruth Bader Ginsburg holding on to the end. There's been
Dianne Feinstein in the Senate. I mean, there's lots of examples.
There's lots of examples of people who stayed in office way longer than they should have. I'm opposed to this though, because I don't think voters are I think voters can look at somebody, they know how old they are, and if that's who they want, I'm a proponent of people getting what they want to vote for.
Yeah, the only thing that gives me pause on the fact that it's going to sail through, there hasn't been any opposition, but there also hasn't been a lot of campaigning for it either. And so North Dakotans have a predisposition to vote no on things. So I think you're right. It'll win, but that's the only thing that sort of gives me pause is that there's been no campaign.
That's a really good
and that
point.
People like to vote no.
That's a really good point. The other interesting thing is it does say that the amendment requires the Attorney General to zealously defend before the court. And the thing about this is you've got to remember the whole point of this, it's backed by the U.S. term limits people. And back in the 90s, the U.S. term limits people lost a U.S. Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court ruled, rightly, I think, that states can't put prerequisites on serving in Congress, right? So what the U.S. Supreme Court said is basically, like, there is an age limit, and I'm forgetting what it is, but like you have to be a certain age to be elected, right? So, I mean, some of that stuff's already in there, and the court says, those things are going to be laid out in the U.S. Constitution, not by the states. So that was struck down. And so what U.S. term limits is trying to do is they're trying to get the question of state-based restrictions or regulations on who could serve in Congress back before the courts, because we have a very different court now than we did in the mid-90s. And they're thinking that this new court will overturn it. I can tell you my one prediction, if North Dakotans pass this, it is going to cost North Dakota taxpayers an enormous amount of money to litigate this thing, because we're going to be litigating over that issue, over the term limits issue. And then also potentially we're going to be, I could see somebody filing suit over an age discrimination thing, over printing ages on the ballot.
So Rob, since you said that it says the Attorney General has to vigorously defend this thing, I've been thinking about the joke that I want to make about Drew Wrigley flipping sides of litigation, but that would be unfair because weren't able to have Drew on Wednesday.
He's got an explanation for that. But
this is one where I might want Drew to switch sides.
Yeah.
And fight against the Constitution.
There's also, there's a weird thing about the Attorney General being obligated to some of these things, because the Attorney General also takes an oath to the Constitution.
Right, and if something's clearly
unconstitutional, and what if it's like a much more clear-cut thing, like we're going to ban Baptist churches or something? Does he have to? He has to defend that law in court,
because the legislature passed it. Yeah,
right. Obviously the legislature's not going to ban, but you know what I mean, though. Like something absurd like that, he has to defend that, or can he just say, "No, I'm not defending that. That's illegal."
Yeah. You're right. You're right. That is sort of silly. But I think we both agree that this thing will likely pass, and then it's going to cost the state a bunch of money.
It's going to be millions of dollars. Okay, so
hold on. A bunch of fiscal conservatives are going to pass this thing.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. The mega populist crowd are not that fiscally conservative.
They think they are.
Well, they think they are. They like to pretend they are. And they're only fiscally conservative when it's Democrats proposing spending.
Or when they want to get rid of all the taxes. They want to get rid of all the taxes, but then spend the taxpayer dollars wildly.
Somebody was asking me about that because they were watching a local legislative race up here in District 38, and they were texting me, and he's like, "I'm watching this," and one of the candidates says that we should be socking all the money away into the legacy fund so that the legacy fund produces enough revenue to just replace all of our taxes. And I'm thinking to myself, if you're a fiscal conservative, you don't want that. I don't want that. I think people should have some skin in the game when it comes to paying for their government.
And paying for their government as they go along. Not just, hey, let's pay more than we're supposed to now. So some future generation doesn't have to pay taxes.
The government belongs to all of us. So I want everybody to pay at least some. And when the government gets bigger, everybody should feel it. Like, that should be part of the cost-benefit analysis. Like, are we going to build a new park? Okay, but it's going to do this to our property taxes.
The cost X, yep.
Yeah.
You're going to build a new school. You're going to put in a new boiler. You're going to hire more police officers.
Sometimes those are the right decisions, right. But we should pay for them. I'm for being fiscally conservative. I think starts with living in fiscal reality. Anyway, we're way off topic. Let's talk about the U.S. Senate race. This is both Kevin Cramer, Katrina Christensen. Nothing's going to change on Tuesday with this race because they're both running unopposed for their respective nominations. The one interesting thing is fundraising from Katrina Christensen. And she has raised a lot of money. I'm looking at this now, over $815,000 in total contributions. The thing is, at the end of the last reporting period, the pre-primary disclosure, which ended on May 22nd, she only had $109,000 in cash on hand. So she raised over $800,000, which is an impressive amount of money for really for any candidate. I mean, you think about it, Julie Fedorchak in the House race has raised just under $1 million, like 900 and some thousand. So Katrina Christensen's right there with a Republican candidate. What concerns me, Chad, is her burn rate.
Yeah, I think the strategy probably when you're, she's not a first-time candidate, but she's a relatively new candidate and doesn't have like a national fundraising base. So it is sort of normal to spend a bunch of money on the front end, sort of building up that fundraising base, and then you can go back to those people over and over and over again, right? So, that does seem high to me, but it does make sense that it costs more to raise that money as a fresh candidate. And here's the thing. So let's say Katrina doesn't win, which she's a Democrat, whatever. She now has this donor base for future races for whatever she wants to do. So it is sort of a good sort of structure building exercise, even if she's burning quite a bit of money to get those donors.
That does make a lot of sense. I just, in terms of winning this race, the incumbent's sitting with like $2.9 million in cash on hand or something like that, nearly $3 million. If she really wanted this shot, and I agree. I think Katrina's playing the long game, and the Democrats around her, but because even if she doesn't run again, she could potentially hand that off to another candidate.
Right.
So I think it's smart what they're doing. I'm not like raining on their parade, but she's been touting her big fundraising number, and that is the asterisk by it is there's a high burn rate, and she has not built up a stockpile of money that she can deploy in the general election to beating this incumbent.
Yeah, and that the problem with running as incumbent, you said Kevin Cramer's got a couple, $2-3 million in the bank. This race gets competitive, and he just can raise so much more as an incumbent.
He makes phone calls and okay, the race has shifted. It's competitive now. Now some money needs to come, and it'll show up.
And again, I think we've talked so much about Katrina's running a relatively impressive campaign. She's getting out there. She's talking to people. It's a different campaign than 2 years ago.
Much improved.
But it's just a tough environment. And Kevin Cramer, even though some of the Trump stuff I think drives us crazy, he's accessible. People generally like him. It's a tough race. But I think
it's tough too, because when you get down to the issues, he votes the way most North Dakotans want him to. Agree with that or not. And even some of the stuff he's kind of good on. So I was just reading an article where there was a group of senators who were threatening to vote against everything because of Trump's trial, or I don't know what they were trying to do. And Cramer had this line where it's like, if you're a group of people who vote no on everything anyway, you don't have much leverage when you're threatening to continue to vote no.
Yeah.
And it was just that is so, even though he's kind of in that Trumpy MAGA, when he'll get jabs at them too. He's just good at his job.
I often will tell my Democrat friends, I hate how good Kevin Cramer is, because he dislikes so much of the stuff he stands for, but he is good. He's accessible. Again, I think that in North Dakota, you have to be accessible. And he does a pretty good job of that. And the other thing that Kevin Cramer has, I think Kelly Armstrong has this to a certain extent as well. They just say what they mean. So they never have to worry about, being consistent or spinning or whatever, because they just consistently say what they mean. And there's something that is likable about that.
That's really something that we have to highlight these two. Look at how different these two are than all the other politicians, because they just say what they mean. It almost kind of feels like more candidates could do that, just come out and not have to hedge the things they're saying.
I think sometimes, we're going to get into some of these other races, but sometimes candidates get overcoached, overscripted, and it makes them not be relatable.
It also takes some talent, because I think there are some politicians who are not trying to be evasive, but they're just nervous or they're just not that articulate, or that's just not their strong suit. And so they're not trying to be evasive, but they come off sounding evasive because they give,
evasive answers.
Right. Well, answers at least that sound evasive, even if they're maybe not trying to be evasive, I guess. Rick Berg, when Rick Berg ran for House and Senate, 2010, 2012, he had that problem.
Right.
And Rick Berg, again, very open, very nice guy, is not an evasive guy, I would say, at all, but just not good. I mean, you get him in an interview and it's like he's trying to sell you a used car.
Right. And then you talk to him one-on-one with no cameras, super normal, likable.
Right. So that can happen. Or sometimes they're just being evasive. So, I mean, that happens. Governor race. I'm wondering what Tammy Miller's doing at this point, because I just looked up her fundraising, and she just dropped another $388,000 into her campaign on June 6th, yesterday. Before that, on May 31st, she dropped $220,000 in. She has now spent given her own campaign, over $3.77 million. That is nearly 90% of the $4.2 million that her campaign. So just about all the money's coming from her. There still hasn't been a contribution from Don. What is she still spending on?
Well, mail pieces that I get at my house that yesterday informed me that she was going to balance the budget, which, if anybody pays attention to North Dakota politics, that's not an impressive statement. That's what we do.
That's the law.
Yeah. It is a good question. I mean, to sort of balance that out, I think Kelly just put another 250 in the last week.
He's at he's at 1.25 million that he's put in total, and that is about 37% of his total take.
So they're both spending a bunch of money. What doesn't make any sense to me, though, is her continuous spend with the polling we've seen both publicly and internally. And, maybe there's something to be said here about her trying to increase her brand for future races, or I just don't know what those would be. But I don't know anybody who thinks this race is particularly competitive at this point, but she's certainly running through the finish line in terms of spending.
When you look at it's always telling when the industry groups start placing their bets. And this is always sort of easier to discern in North Dakota because, a lot of these groups that represent ag interests or energy interests or what have you, they just want to be in good with the winner, especially in the Republican primary. And they're placing their bets, and those bets are not being placed on Tammy Miller. I think it's funny that these industry folks waited until the polling was 40% before they placed their bets. But that's what they do. I mean, they do that every cycle. That's just how they play the game.
I will also note that if Kelly Armstrong wins, I'm guessing Kelly also recognizes when these contributions came in as well. So I don't know that. And I will just say Kelly is accessible to people who agree with him or disagree. So it won't affect things, but it is sort of funny to think like, oh, now he's going to like me because I gave $5,000 when he was up 40 points.
He's not going to punish some agriculture group because they donated in late May instead of in February or something. So.
But he's also not going to be like, that contribution put me over the top to win this thing.
Let's be honest. I mean, it kind of feels like he had this from the moment he got into the race.
Listen, we can go back to us talking about this race and when Tammy Miller was thinking about getting in, and neither of us could figure out sort of what the path was and what the lane was, because it was sort of trying to be far right, Trumpy, but those folks in North Dakota hate Doug Burgum, right? I mean, so where was the path ever at? And I never saw it, and I don't think it materialized.
No. So it's hard to get, on the Trump stuff, and as much as it might drive you and I nuts, how do you get to Kelly Armstrong's right on the Trump stuff? I mean, given how, we just had an interview with him where we had a pretty heated conversation about, the conviction and everything. And Armstrong is articulate on that front. He's very detailed, and I just don't see where Armstrong has ever really given the MAGA crowd a reason to dislike him.
How do you get to the right of him on Trump when he carried the water for a Biden impeachment?
Yeah, I don't know how you do that. Again, I'm not happy with him for doing that. But the thing, as a practical matter of electoral politics, that was kind of the path Miller tried to take, and she ran into a box canyon.
Listen, we're analyzing the campaigns and who's going to win and lose here, and not necessarily agreeing with the paths that folks that took.
That's right.
I mean, we can on a Wednesday do an analysis of everything that Kelly said during the campaign that we thought was dumb, if you want, but that's probably not a good use of our time.
Probably not. Anyway, I think I think the poll's going to turn out to be right. I think Miller is going to get in the ballpark at 30%.
I was thinking 30 to 35.
Right. Armstrong 65 to 70, somewhere there. And that's going to be that race. So now we're going to move on to the first kind of difficult race to handicap, right? So both of us were in agreement. Age limit ballot measure is going to pass. Kevin, I guess there's nothing to predict in the Senate race because they're both obviously going to win.
Well, let's get some wins on the board here. I say Kevin Cramer, Katrina Christensen in the primaries.
Yeah. We'll be like Trump and pick a couple of sure things to pad our stats.
Yeah.
And then we both obviously Armstrong's going to beat Miller. House race. I guess I'll lead with my numbers. I mean, kind of the math that I've done in my head. I think Julie's going to get close to 40, if not at 40. I think Becker's going to be in the ballpark of about 30 because it seems like in every poll, one poll after another, it just kind of seems that's where he's been stuck the entire time. I think Mund is going to be in the ballpark of about 20. And then the other 10% will be Alex Balaz and whoever randomly votes for Charlotte Moore, I guess.
So we didn't talk about this beforehand, but here's the numbers I've written down. Fedorchak 42, Becker 28, Mund 22.
Okay.
And I think what's going to be interesting about this is I do think Kara Mund's going to be closer to Rick Becker than Rick Becker is going to be to Julie Fedorchak. The amount of anecdotal stories I'm hearing around Bismarck, primarily of Democrats crossing over just to bullet vote for Kara Mund, it's really remarkable. I mean, people who I'm hearing about who are like not activists, but are just like, so I think her number is going to be a little bit higher than the polling shows. And I think Becker's stuck at that number. And I think, I agree with you. Julie's going to be somewhere at 40 or just above 40.
Yeah, because I don't think that Mund is going to pull. I mean, the real danger to Fedorchak wasn't Democrats crossing over to vote for Mund. The danger to Fedorchak was moderate Republicans who would have voted for her switching their vote to Mund. And I don't think Mund has done really anything to appeal to those Republicans.
And the numbers are so small. I mean, if this ended up, and it could, I suppose, but if this was like a 35-34 race, then you could talk about that. But if Julie is where the trajectory of this race is sort of showing, I think her spend at the end was beneficial to her. If it ends up being that, 10, 12, 15 points, Kara has no bearing on that result.
A 40 or 4, like if Fedorchak gets to like 42%, and then Becker's a distant second at like 28, which would be, I mean, if she's at 42, he's at 28, like you said, that's a 14-point win. That's remarkable in this race. I mean, that's really, I mean, I would almost call that like a landslide in a 5-way race. That's a big win.
I think, again, from the beginning, we've been talking about Becker's in that 25 to 30 range. He literally did nothing in this campaign to move anybody who wasn't already with him. And so his only path was to figure out how to get Julie down to 30. And this is a 5-person race, but it's really a 3-person race. And to try to, I mean, when there's only 3 viable candidates, no offense to Alex Balaz at all, but there was just not a lot of action there. If your ceiling is 30, it's hard for him to, especially when he wasn't bringing people into his camp. He was mostly excluding people from his camp.
The dynamics are so interesting because Balaz is going to end up with less than 10% of the vote probably. And it makes me wonder, though, what Balaz's presence did, because I think you make an excellent point when you say that Becker spent this whole race basically preaching to the choir. He spent this whole race firing up a whole lot of people who are going to vote for him anyway. And to a point that makes sense because you want those people to be enthusiastic and you want them to show up. But in order to win, he had to go beyond that. And I don't know what has he done to go, because it's all about, I'm a bull in a china closet. I'm going to go there and vote no against everything. Matt Gaetz endorsed me. The Freedom Caucus endorsed me. except when I don't want to talk about the Freedom Caucus endorsing.
Bob Good endorsed me until he did.
I love Donald Trump, even though he endorsed my opponent. He's the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, all this stuff, like nothing to sort of peel centrist voters away from, or traditionally conservative, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's like, Rob, don't call them moderate Republicans. Don't call them centrists. Like, that's a dirty word.
Yeah.
It's an accurate word.
The only thing he tried to do was to try to make Julie be sort of weak on abortion, right? I mean, he said she wrote that blog back in the day, and it seems like she's pro-choice. At the same time, Julie's coming out for a national abortion ban, right? I mean, so it's like...
Well, and then you look at the pro-life groups that have... I mean, if that's your issue, like the pro-life groups like Emily's List and those have endorsed Julie Fedorchak.
Well, Emily's List is a left group.
When is that? Okay. What am I thinking?
Yeah.
One of them. I'm forgetting now.
Yeah. Emily's List endorsed Julie. We would have a real story here.
Yeah. Okay. You're right. That's right. I forgot which one that was. Yeah. She. No. I'm forgetting now. Maybe it was North Dakota Right to Life. Maybe it was some of the state-based groups. I don't know.
But Concerned Women, maybe.
And I think a couple of them have endorsed. The press release went out. But I also just don't perceive abortion to be like the issue that this race is going to hinge on either. I mean, not with Donald Trump at the top of the ballot, kind of diluting the issue. And also, I mean, I think we've talked a lot that the Dobbs decision was bad for Republicans, and it was in some ways. But I think in a good way, it was good for Republicans in that the abortion issue is just not what it once was.
Yeah, and it's not even really a federal issue anymore. Right. It's not even really an issue for a congressional candidate, unless they do a national abortion ban, which I think most people don't see that as a viable political option.
Well, because even that's hard, because so much of the pro-life movement has been about giving it back to the states. So
right.
the pro-life movement itself is not even united on the question of a national abortion ban. There's plenty of them that are like, no, leave it to the states. That's the last thing that we want.
Yep.
And I don't want that either. I don't want abortion policy to be flip-flopping back and forth based on who's got a majority in Congress at the time, because that's what will happen. And that would be terrible.
And I've seen some sort of analysis that abortion isn't playing as well for Democrats nationally as they expected to, because like in some of these bluish, purplish states, they're like, well, we have the rights to abortion. They're never going to take that away in my state. Why would I care if North Dakota has rights or not?
I feel like the argument that I made when Dobbs came down, that this was going to be good for the country, that allowing each state to sort of do what it's going to do on abortion was going to sort of put oil on the waters of that issue. I think that's proving to be right.
I will not give you that point. I mean, just I'm not going to allow you to do a victory lap here on that yet.
Okay.
How's that?
All right. Fair enough. So the House race, but I do think, to my point, I wonder if Alex Balazs kind of boxed Becker in, where he was afraid that if he tried to appeal to Fedorchak voters by maybe moving to the center, being less bombastic, then he starts losing his base, who, let's be honest, they could be a fickle bunch. Maybe they flock to Balazs.
Yeah, Balazs is the Becker alternative in this race. There's no doubt about that, right? And so I think having him on the ballot probably did make it more difficult for Becker.
Yeah. And then the Charlotte Moore thing, I think completely back. I don't think that's going to be a factor at all. I mean, she's going to get some votes because her name's there and some randos will vote for her, but...
Right, or people who just know the other four and hate the other four, or know the other three, hate the other...
Who knows why? I mean, she might get a point or two.
Right.
But I just don't see... I mean, Becker supporters putting Charlotte Moore on the ballot just completely backfired.
Certainly when Farah got on the ballot.
Yeah. And then where does Munn go after this?
I don't know. I really like,
because she can't go back. I mean, she can't.
Yeah.
The thing that like you can't talk about because she'll just get mad about it is her just support from Democrats. Like, it just seems like that's her home, that's her base. Why didn't she just go there?
Yeah, we talked about earlier Katrina Christensen sort of playing the long game. I would also say the Democrat in this race, Trigg V. Hammer, who just came out with a real fantastic 2-minute video. Yeah.
If I was First of all, you guys got to watch. I think it's Officers Eat Last is the title of it. People should go look at. I mean, even if you're not interested in voting for Trygve Hammer at all, you should watch that video. Because if Trygve Hammer is running that tenor of a campaign, which by the way, it's very populist, very blue collar, very patriotic. If he's running that against a Rick Becker, he gives Rick Becker a run for his money.
Trygve Hammer is appealing to white working class folks in North Dakota because he is working class, patriotic, military background, working on oil rigs.
It's not contrived at all. Like, it's not. Yeah, this is who Trygve Hammer is.
It's so good. And so thinking about sort of Trygve playing the long game, Katrina playing the long game, I don't know that Cara is thinking about the long game here, right? Because I think this is like, I don't know where she goes from here. I mean, she chose to run as a Republican. There are Democrats who are frustrated by that fact. And I just don't know where her home is. You know, if I were advising her, I would advise her to get her legal career off the ground, make some money and come back in, 10 years or so.
It's something that's made it, but she's burned some bridges on. I mean, if she's going to continue to insist she's a Republican, I mean, she's really burned some bridges.
Right.
And I just don't see, and I think she's probably burned some bridges among Democrats too. Although to your point, there are plenty who are enthusiastic to supporting her. But I mean, to me, I think that's her future, but she's going to have to take some cycles off.
Yeah, I think take some cycles off and hope that North Dakota sort of gets back to a more competitive environment, right? In where she could run as a Democrat or an independent at some point. I just don't see in this sort of, it was a tough time for, if it was a normal cycle in running as a Republican, maybe she could have done it, but it's the Trump thing. She wasn't going to get 50% of the Republicans in a primary in this sort of Trump environment.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Trygve Hammer sitting at $141,000 in cash on hand. He's raised $387,000 so far. He is the best. He's beating what Max Schneider did. I mean, Max Schneider is in my mind sort of the last really competitive U.S. House candidate the Democrats ran, and Hammer's outraising him so far. Now, some of that, I mean, inflation, some of that is population growth. But
regardless if he's beating Max Schneider or not, it's a good number.
He's a good number. I mean, I'm trying to praise him. Like, he's been the most he's the most competitive Democrat in fundraising in a while. So really since Earl Pomeroy, probably.
Yeah.
So he's really doing well. He's got a message that could resonate. I would keep my eye. Now, I don't think he's going to beat Fedorchak in the general. We'll see. But he's somebody I'm keeping my eye on. He is not an unserious candidate, and I don't think he's just going to go away. I think if he keeps running and he does it the right way, he could be one of the. I mean, there's some candidates that lose and they start to lose credibility because of the way they ran and they lost. Right. There's some candidates that lose, but they continue to gain credibility. And I think Trygve Hammer and even Katrina Christensen are positioning themselves where they can build.
They can build, and also Democrats can build on them. I mean, you look at Trygve Hammer in sort of who he is. That's an appealing Democrat in North Dakota, and his message is appealing for Democrats. I think it's something that folks can learn from as well. Yeah. So high praise for Trygve Hammer.
The tough thing is when it gets down to policy, which by the way is what it should always come down to. Ultimately, is policy. But I really like Trygve Hammer. I mean, he's a likable person.
Right.
I like Katrina Christensen too. But I really like Trygve. I mean, he's a very personable, very nice person. I think he really cares about North Dakota. For me, the reason why I wouldn't vote for somebody like Trygve Hammer is he's just more liberal than I am.
Yeah. Well, but also at the same time, I mean, I think Trygve and Katrina are both committed to immigration reform and sort of stopping the illegal immigrants coming into the state. I think that taking care of our veterans, I mean, there's a lot of things from a policy perspective that appeal to both parties.
Yes.
That these guys are bringing to the table.
If you probably like farm bill issues, you're probably not going to see a lot of daylight between them and Republicans.
Right. Yeah. So, hey, Rob, we better pick up the pace if we're going to get to legislative.
Let's get to legislative races. That's right.
We should do DPI first.
DPI, Baszler.
Quick second.
I think Heitkamp. I think Jason Heitkamp.
So that the two things I'm looking, who takes second? I think it's Jason Heitkamp. And where does Baszler land? Does Baszler get 55 or 60?
I think she gets north of. I think she gets north of 50.
Yeah, I agree with that, but how much north of 50 is what I'm.
I don't know that she can get to 60, and I think that's where some of the baggage and stuff hurts her.
Yeah.
I think the problem is anybody. Heitkamp's going to take second because a bunch of Democrats are going to be confused by his last name. Remember, this is a nonpartisan race, so it's on both the Republican and the Democratic ballot. And there's going to be a lot of Democratic voters who say, "Oh, Heitkamp."
And two candidates move on.
Right. Two candidates move on to the general, so it's going to be Heitkamp and Baszler. But Baszler's got some baggage. There's some people that remember the DUIs and the arrests and some other things. And by the way, she was not convicted of anything. I want to be very clear. In fact, she was in an abusive relationship. But anyway.
Well, and Rob, I think if these statewide races go the way we just predicted them to, the North Dakota GOP convention is irrelevant to future elections. If Alex Balazs takes fourth, if Bartlett takes third in the DPI race, it's a pretty clear sign.
Even because you're right, those are the two endorsed candidates. But even like you look at Becker wasn't allowed to seek the endorsement at the convention. I think if he had been allowed to seek the endorsement at the convention, he would have won it because Balazs won because of a lot of Becker protest votes. So even Becker though, if he loses by 10, 11, 12, 14 points, how is that? I mean, I think at that point the party's got to ask itself. And I've been talking to a lot of Republicans and saying, listen, you guys can't stop. Like we're going to have the election in November. In January, the legislature is going to begin. But also that month, local districts are going to begin reorganizing. You guys got to keep running. You've got to take some of those districts back because you're right. The party's irrelevant, but the party can also start costing them elections.
Right.
Because like it or not, the party is the brand. And if the brand is Jim Bartlett, and I don't want to say Alex Balazs is a good, but Alex Balazs' problem is he's just unknown.
Alex Balazs is not a net negative for the party.
Alex Balazs could potentially be a very good, I hope he runs again. I know he's not sure what he's going to do, but we asked him about that. I hope he runs again. All right, we got to get to these legislative races.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say I should have a story going up as we're recording this. So by the time this is available, I think the story will be online. Because obviously one of the stories of all these legislative races is Representative Brandon Pritchard and his Citizens Alliance group out there just attacking other Republicans, including a lot of Republicans who have the endorsement of his party, right? They were endorsed by their local conventions. I have a new story going up. So one of the people who contributed to Pritchard's, because he did the whole thing where he had the YR Victory Fund and then he took all the money out of the YR Victory Fund and put it into the Citizens Alliance group. So Danita Bai, who is a member of the State Board of Higher Education, appointed there by Governor Burgum, her and her husband gave $5,000 plus to the YR Victory Fund. And she said she wants her money back. She said she did not understand that it was going to be spent in this way. And bolstering her case, she gave me a flyer. And this will be published in my column. She gave me a flyer. And in the flyer, it says that the YR Victory Fund is an important part of the NDGOP team. It's an arm of the NDGOP. He uses the term ND Young Republicans, capitalized, proper noun. Well, there's a group in North Dakota called the North Dakota Young Republicans. And they have ex officio status with the NDGOP, which means they're a non-voting member of the executive committee. I talked to somebody at the North Dakota Young Republicans. They didn't know anything about this group. So Pritchard's out there raising money for the YR Victory Fund, using literature that makes it sound like he's raising money for the North Dakota Young Republicans, and then turns around and puts all the money in the Citizens Alliance group, which again is attacking party-endorsed candidates. And also, by the way, I mean, at one point he sent out an email attacking dozens of his fellow members of the legislature, calling them woke and spineless because they voted against the pronouns bill, even though most of them voted for an identical bill. So it was misleading in the first place. So he raised money on the idea that he was like part of the NDGOP team, and now he's attacking NDGOP candidates.
So, Rob, I think calling Brandon Pritchard a snake oil salesman is a disservice to people who sell snake oil, because everything he does is dishonest. Everything that he does maybe has a grain of truth at the most, but by and large, it's lies. And what we're going to find out on Tuesday is if this brand of politics, this brand of sending mail into District 30 and 32 and 34 and 14 and 6, saying people like John Nelson shouldn't be around your daughters, or that Mike Nathy and Glenn Bosch are porn peddlers. North Dakota is going to decide on Tuesday if that's the kind of politics we want or not. Because my fear is if these folks that Brandon Pritchard is supporting win, we're going to see more of this. And what makes me really nervous is on Tuesday down in South Dakota, moderate Republicans got throttled. That I think it was 18 incumbents lost in the primary to far-right candidates. And so if this is the politics North Dakotans want, support those candidates that Brandon Pritchard is supporting. I don't think North Dakotans want this. And so I think those folks getting those mail pieces that are saying terrible things about these folks, if you want to stop this garbage, you need to vote for the normals, the normies, not moderates, not squishy centrists. These are conservatives. But this is an opportunity for North Dakotans to say this is not the kind of politics we have in North Dakota. Otherwise, it's going to get worse.
Many of those Republicans who have been in office for a long time, who have kept North Dakota's budget balanced, have budgeted our way to budget surpluses. I mean, we could talk about reducing the income taxes. I mean, I feel like they've generally done a pretty good job. We could quibble. We could do a whole show about things they've done that we don't like, but
I could give you a list on each one of these guys on how they voted wrong on things.
Well, sure. You're a Democrat, too.
Yeah, exactly right. But here's what I wouldn't do is send out basically pornography accusing these guys of being pedophiles or whatever, because I disagree with them on policy.
It is kind of remarkable that, sort of the Pritchard crowd, we have to pass these book bans and we can't trust librarians because there's pornography in our library, but they don't have any problem putting those pictures on mailers. Granted, they're like blurred out, kind of, but you could tell what it is, and then sending them out to everybody. Like, I guess that's okay. I don't know.
Yeah, and Rob, my kid checks my mail sometimes.
Yeah, mine does too. It's cynical and stupid, and I hope it's not what wins, but sometimes cynical and stupid does win.
Right.
South Dakota was a lot about the carbon pipeline.
Yep.
I don't know the extent to which that's going to play here. So let's talk about some of the actual races, though. Let's talk about, so I think District 30 is probably okay. That's Representative Nathy, Representative Glenn Bosch, Senator Diane Larson. I think they're going to be fine. And by the way, I should put a caveat on this. Legislative races are very hard to handicap because
we know nothing.
The vote totals are very low. There's never really any polling. And a lot of time it can turn on personalities. I mean, they can be intensely personal at times. But I think District 30 is probably safe. Representative Porter's district over in Mandan, he's going to be fine.
District 32 in Bismarck, where somebody's challenging Pat Heinert and Lisa Meyer. Yep. I think, Rob, I agree. Those three are places where turnout is going to be higher, and that's beneficial to the incumbents there. So I think those are three places where I agree with you 100% that traditional Republicans should be okay. I think
where I'm kind of putting question marks is District 14, which is a big sort of eastern central North Dakota district, from Rugby down south, kind of between Highway 2 and Interstate 94. That's Representative John Nelson, Representative Robin Wise, Senator Jerry Klein. That's one where I feel like they could be in danger.
I would add to that list. I agree with that. District 2, which is the area around Williston, that rural area up there where the incumbent House members are Bert Anderson and Don Longmire, and then Bob Harns is the normal person running for the Senate seat up there that was held by David Rust against three less than traditional folks. I'm worried about that one will go towards the Bastiat
District 2, by the way, that's Tioga, and that is
Stanley, right?
That's the home of the Sons of Liberty. That's where they started. Right. Sort of a very, very right-wing group. If you were at the NDGOP convention in 2022, they were the ones with the cowboy hats and the guns.
Well, to put a finer point on that Senate race, the guy who got the GOP nomination there, Mark Engett, is quoted in the paper saying the primary reason he's running is because of all the transgender stuff that's happening in our public schools. That's the primary reason he's running for the Senate. I mean, wow. Yeah. Wow.
And I don't know, if you have a kid in school, I think you're kind of scratching your head going, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And of all the things that our schools need or issues, that's probably not. Or, I mean, oil country. If that's the primary issue you think that matters to your district and oil country, it's crazy. And then I think District 6 is in that bucket as well. That's Paul Thomas and Dick Anderson, where they didn't get the nomination. Those three sort of rural districts, I think, are going to be problematic for traditional Republicans.
I think that District 38, where you had City Councilwoman Lisa Olson, who was kept out, that's a question mark for me as well. Now, Lisa Olson has a lot of name recognition. She was, I mean, obviously her own service, longtime City Councilwoman. Also, long time, I mean, she was on the executive committee of her party at one point. Her husband used to be the chief of police. So they're very well known.
Long-time educator up there as well.
Yep.
Very impressive.
Yep, but she was denied even party membership. She wasn't even allowed to participate or seek her party's endorsement. I wrote a lot of articles about that earlier in the year. That's kind of a question mark for me. And then also District 26 down in Watford City, Jeremy Olson. Who, again, very impressive guy, longtime township boards. I think he served on county commissions, West Point graduate. Very impressive guy. Very smart guy, just got elected, right? So he was, and is having to run again because of redistricting, I think, right? Because he's only been one legislative session, but he's somebody else too who might be on the bubble.
Yeah, and then District 42, I think up in Grand Forks, that's where you got the open house seat or Senate seat that Kirk Cruin is leaving, where we had Dustin McNally on a while ago, and Claire Corey, who's a House member, running for the Senate there. And then we have Sadie Hansen, Emily O'Brien, and then a sort of far-right House candidate there running. What makes me nervous in that district for Emily O'Brien, first of all, that she's been accused of these ethical things that have been in the paper up there. But secondly, that district includes UND and the Air Force Base. That district historically has been so exceptionally low in turnout that's one where 10 or 15 votes or
because it's really it's kind of a really transitory lot of college students in that,
right? And in the Air Force Base, it's people who don't have roots here, so maybe vote at home or other places like that. And so I'm nervous about that one for traditional Republicans as well, that it just feels like that's one of the places where Pritchard went really, really hard against Emily O'Brien. And what does that mean for that race?
And the reason Emily O'Brien, I mean, in addition to the fact that she's a traditional Republican, she was also one of the women who spoke up against Luke Simons and has had a target on her back from the far right ever since, which is unfortunate and ugly and gross. Let me ask one last question before we wrap up here is because we just ran through some, a few districts we think are safe, a lot more that we think are question marks. What does victory, by the way, is Brandon Pritchard going to win in District 8? Because he's on the ballot too.
So I've been thinking about District 8 a lot. By a lot, I mean the 30 minutes before this show today. Do you think there's a scenario where Pritchard has his supporters just bullet vote for him and it sort of leaves his running mate, Sue Ann Olson, on the outside looking in, or Sue Ann Olson?
Sue Ann Olson.
Like, could you see a scenario where it's Pritchard and one of the normals running?
So it's Mike Berg and Ken Wrench are the two normies running. Sue Ann Olson and Pritchard are the two incumbents who are kind of MAGA, or kind of Bastiat, whatever you want to say about him. And then just Senator Jeff Magram's running unopposed in the primary. Maybe, I think that Mike and Ken have run a really strong campaign, and it would surprise me if one of them didn't get in. Pritchard, I think, is probably the big, because he's so visible. But I don't know. I mean, is that going to cut for him or against him? He's created a lot of negativity around himself.
Yeah, no, I think like that's a tough one to handicap there. I mean, you sort of have to think that either both of the normies win or both of the far rights win. But I think there is a chance where people will go in and say, I just really like Pritchard, or I'm ultra conservative and I don't like Pritchard, so I'm going to vote for Olson and then just one of these other guys over here. So I think it's hard to handicap. I think the legislature would be a better place if Brandon Pritchard loses on Tuesday.
My prediction is that overall in these primaries, I think it's going to end up being a mixed bag. I think both sides are going to be able to claim some victories. Neither side is going to emerge with just a clear cut, we dominated.
I think it's going to be a mixed bag, but a mixed bag, excuse me, means the far right has more seats in the legislature than they did previous legislature.
Yeah.
Right. Because these are all incumbent seats we're talking about, or normal seats other than District 8. And so if the normies lose half of them, they're going backwards in the session.
That's true. The one other thing I will say, though, is this approach that Pritchard has taken, I would argue, is not sustainable. So even if they gain some ground this time around, he's burning a lot of bridges, and a lot of this stuff is not stuff that you can repeat. Because certainly not repeat sort of unopposed and catch people unawares. Because I think, again, a lot of people didn't know he was going to go this ugly.
And the fact that he went this ugly makes these non-traditional candidates in District 2, 6, 14, 42, and other places, if they win, if the Pritchard candidates win, it makes them completely ineffective legislators, because these traditional Republicans who still dominate the chambers up there are not going to forgive them. They're not going to, they've seen these mail pieces, and they're going after their friends.
I can't speak for Kelly Armstrong, but I mean, how's his administration going to react to some of that? Are they going to be marginalized? I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for him. I don't know. But they've burned some bridges, and that's tough. And I think what they're counting on is eventually their numbers will be so big they don't have to worry about bridges to that side of the party. But I think there's going to be a point where there's a backlash against this. I don't think it's sustainable. I just don't know that that's going to come up this year. But we'll see. We're going to end it there. Thank you so much for that. Those are our predictions. And I guess the next time you hear our voices, it'll either be Chad and I, touting ourselves and claiming victory, or it will be us sort of ruefully admitting that we got it way wrong.
Hey, Rob, before we leave, and I've got a hard stop. Dodgers win 2 out of 3 against the Yankees this week in Yankee Stadium.
I just want a healthy Juan Soto to take the field at this point. That's where I'm at. He hurt his arm, and if Juan Soto's really hurt, I hope he's not. I hope for his sake. He's in his walk year as a generational talent. I don't want to see him injured. And also I want to see him taking the field for every Yankees game for the rest of the year. You could be right. I don't think we're going to sweep the series by any stretch, but I would say 2 out of 3 to the Yankees. But we'll see.
Well, and I would just say I want to see Juan Soto on the field. I want to see Aaron Judge on the field.
Absolutely.
I mean, these are 2 very talented teams with some
Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani. They're all going to be on the same field. This is going to be unbelievable. So, all right, we're going to go. Thank you so much for listening.